Hello, internet watchers. As per usual, I am talking to an artist, and if you've been following me over the last few weeks, you may have a clue as to who that is. That person is River, aka Idle Fire. How are you doing, River?
Hi, John. I'm fine. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I want to know more about your actual identity in politics. Aside from your music, you've got so much to say. Your stuff comes up on my home feed quite a lot on the Facebook platform. So, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you a few questions.
Of course, I'm ready.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Okay, so firstly, is there anything that you'd like to address in the way a heteronormative media depicts same-sex relationships?
Okay, how much time have we got, John? Because you know, I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know where to start. I mean, the problem is that a lot of the time, the media representations doesn't come from us. It comes from people who want to sell you product. Doesn't our voices are very rarely heard, and it's more likely that white heterosexual cis man will be telling the stories or will be the director. So I think while there is room for arguing that everyone can tell everyone's stories, when it comes to oppressed minorities, I think you have to take into account that someone who hasn't experienced these uh, circumstances will have a harder time telling an authentic story. I think it's important, especially to let us speak about our stories.
Sure.
And I mean, it's the same thing when it comes. I mean, I don't want to be I don't want to be presumptuous, but I think it's probably a similar things for uh, people of color to see representation when it's a white voice telling those stories. I don't know. What do you think?
Oh, for sure. I think ultimately the main, say, um, antagonist would be capitalism. It finds ways to sell ideas of us through the screen, and if possible, it wants those ideas to be something that's powerful enough to give up your credit for any particular, say, product, as we've spoken about before of camera, and in some way through that misrepresentation they can create an idea of, say, race. And in your case, they can create an idea of sexuality that may actually be quite far from the actual truth, but it's used
Yeah.
to sell, So it's really that common foe, really. Um,
Yeah, and I guess nowadays, even more so than with sexual orientations and non-heteronormative affection and love, even more so nowadays, it's it happens with gender identities. I mean, for many decades. Transgender people have been the part of the joke, and nowadays there's slowly little glimmers of hope that this is changing slowly. But yeah, it's unacceptable, really, and it makes life so much harder for the people whose voices are taken away, essentially. So the representation is so vital. It can make difference for for a kid growing up and feeling like disconnected from their environment. Even more so, I guess, in the LGBTQ plus community, where oftentimes we just don't have a network, a safety network around us, unless we manage to meet other LGBTQ plus people, which is not always possible, especially for younger folks. So it can make a huge difference. It can give people confidence. It can make people feel less alone. So I will never tire of saying just how important representation is.
Sure, for sure. That inclusivity factor is so important. I mean, every now and again, I will have a conversation with someone who doesn't necessarily share this particular point of view. And for people
Mm.
like that, I often say, well, when's the last time you saw, say, an action movie or a comedy or a musical that had a transgender, say, character in a position of power? They're normally in a position of ridicule. They're normally in a position where they are basically on the back foot and they are there to play out the heteronormative POV that is in some
Yeah.
way making them lesser. So there is that. I
If
will.
if they are there at all, that
Exactly,
is.
if they're there at all. I mean, often when they
Yeah.
are there, they are like in many cases. There was a Michael Caine film. I'm sure viewers who know this, the person who was who they were who Michael Caine was playing was a killer. And we could go and look at Silence of the Lambs. There's all sorts of different tropes where essentially they're
Yeah.
positioned as a threat. But this is,
Although one might say that the killer in The Silence of the Lambs is not a transgender, he just has a fetish. So
well,
I
that's the problem.
guess
That's the problem.
the
They're not.
problem is that people associate the two things.
Yes.
But like people will disagree on that, but I don't think that Silence of the Lambs is a transphobic film, uh,
Well, that's
essentially.
well, that's the thing. That's what
But
becomes
that's
even
the
more.
interpretation of people can make it so.
Mm.
To be fair, I'd be more concerned about J.K. Rowling's latest books, series of detective stories where transgender people are truly depicted as evil. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just going back a little bit, you're right. It's that association with the queer identity that is seen
yeah,
as a threat. And that goes back to films like, say, Norman Bates and Psycho, which, if
yeah,
anything, when we look at J.K. Rowling's latest book with the person who literally is killing people in bathrooms and to get access, they dress up as a woman.
yeah,
The reason why I think a lot of legacy media accept this as a trope is because they've been used to it for decades. So they don't question where that's coming from. But if you had a similar, say, trope that was, say, one that addressed POC in an often negative light, because we've had certain inroads within those civil rights causes, people are a lot more afraid of, like, being called a racist. They'd rather chance being called transphobic, so there is that.
yeah. But although I have to say, nobody ever, likes to be called anything. So in my experience, people like like to uh, describe themselves more as something like gender critical, of just claim that they are just defending reality or women, which, well, to me it's very ridiculous. But if we go dive into that, we're never coming out. So
Well, we will go into aspects of that in our written interview because,
yeah,
as we will always want to do in these Zoom interviews, we'll keep it relatively simple so that people can have time to think about it in that way, because these are very, very big concepts. But yes, I have
yeah.
more questions for you regarding your identity in politics, so we shall move on. Next question is, when would you say you became aware of how important it is to vocalize your ideals for your platforms? And have you ever given pause over what you had to say?
To be fair, I don't even think a lot of the time whether it's important to do it. It's just something that compels me. I feel like I need to tell my truth, and I need to live my truth and tell my truth, because otherwise, I just don't know how to live with myself, essentially. Like, I feel like possibly making posts on social media is not gonna make a huge of a difference. Like, I'm not an influencer. I don't have a large reach, but even if maybe I can make a friend, an old friend, reflect on or have some doubts about the way they've been going about things, just because it's what's been done in society up until now, well, maybe that's already a little victory, for
Sure,
me.
sure,
So I just try to, I guess, lead by example. That's the best, I guess, uh, one can hope for, like, to touch somebody's opinion.
sure, sure. I think it's really valid in this day and age to use social media as a starting point for a conversation, if possible, with those that you have already met, because then there's going to be good faith there. Because if
Yeah,
anything, the real,
sometimes,
yeah, yeah, the real
hopefully.
power, I think, is when you're actually face to face with them, or on a phone call. At least then there's less opportunities for bad faith, not just from them, but
Yeah,
for other people who jump in, because we were all there at
yeah.
2020 with what I would call, it's quite an intense, almost like civil war atmosphere, I think, especially on Facebook, for a lot of people. So there is that.
You mean regarding the vaccines, or?
Well, where do we start? The vaccines, Black Lives Matter, intense misogyny from the police. Um,
Me
yeah,
too.
yeah. So yeah, that's even going back even further. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's a whole Pandora's box. But yeah, we know that
Yeah,
happened.
like, I don't know. I do want to go into that, but at the same time, you can believe what you believe about the Heard versus Step uh, trial. You can believe that she lied. You can believe that he lied, but the kind of violence, verbal violence that I've seen around, and against Amber Heard, I think it's quite vile, to be fair. Like,
Yeah.
regardless of what you believe, I have my opinions, but I think this is maybe not the place to discuss them.
Well, I think, and obviously when this comes out, it will be sometime after the particular furor, but for that is actually, like, risen. I think there is definitely, from what I can see, a certain acknowledgement that people they have to see that a lot of extremists who have issues regarding women, they've been radicalized by this trial, or at least exposed their radicalization, in that they have no good relationship to femininity. And so, therefore, if they believe that someone famous can be like an archetype for, say, the mistrustful woman, or like the psycho X trope, they can use that to legitimize all
Yeah.
sorts of things being said. So I think people are starting to acknowledge that that's what's really going on. I think anyone who can't see that is either, to be honest, part of that particular contagion, or for some reason they think it threatens their argument. It may not be so binary, but that's what I've seen so far.
I don't know. I think it's quite complex. Also, seeing how many people seem to be convinced that she's hurt the Me Too cause, and that she's making it harder for victims to come forward, for the real victims to come forward. And uh, personally, I think that's an absurd argument. And I'm thinking, if anything, the amount of vitriol that's been directed at Heard is making it harder for people to come forward. And it's not just women, but for victims in general, to come forward, because they're thinking, well, what if they're not going to believe me? What if they're going to ridicule me and insult me and wish me death, and all those things that I've seen on social media? So it's it's a complex issue, but I think it's mostly, I think, scary to
Sure,
see
sure. I
where
mean,
people's cruelty can, what peaks it can reach. It's yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a massive fan of The Guardian, but there was a really good piece about there not being a perfect
Yeah,
victim. Um,
yeah, I read that. I
yeah,
read that. I think it was a pretty lucid argument for it, and people might think it's absolutely fake, but yeah, I think that was a good expression of what I've been thinking all along during during the trial, even before the final sentence.
yeah, yeah. I think what might be useful in saying before we move on is I think when we're watching, like, say, a medium like, say, film or TV, or listening to a song, we're often trying to decide how we feel about a particular character and how they are moving through their journey. And I
Yeah,
think some of the things that have been hijacked in that process of taking in that kind of story information is our need to be on one side or the other. And I think that
yeah,
that's definitely affected how people have interacted with this trial. I think some people aren't even aware that these are people, like Johnny Depp
yeah,
isn't someone that he's not someone that you know. You may know Jack Sparrow, you may know him through Edward Scissorhands, but essentially, I mean, one of the biggest fallacies is that this trial was televised, because this culture, as we know it, our big emotional arc as a culture, I'm talking globally, is to
yeah,
realize that things are not so binary, on this particular issue, especially, that if we're not wanting to deal with nuance, then we'll find ourselves falling on one side or the other, and then seemingly having to stay there because we've associated ourselves with a team. And I think that's the end of things, in my opinion.
yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I think in a lot of the issues that are uh, on on the top of the list of issues that are being discussed in these recent years, I think lack of nuance is a serious problem, and actually, what a lot of time bothers me and is that people who I disagree with tend to bring this up, this lack of nuance, and in the end, this argument can become a tool for sort of like how would you say, like, there's a linguistic barrier right now, sort of tone down
Sure.
the uh, the pushes from the progressive forces, which is, I guess, a bit of a risk,
Yeah.
which I guess makes some people be more rigid and assertive on the left,
Mm.
trying to combat subtle, sneaky arguments from the right.
Yeah, yeah, for
It's
sure.
it's not an easy thing to navigate at all.
No, I think some of the problem is that there are people who, on both sides, have something to gain from propagating the idea that they have a certain something to say about a particular issue. But I find, for most of the time, the people who do have something to really offer are those who are actually living through that issue. So it's really good to be mindful. I mean, in some ways, some of the best ways to be an activist regarding certain aspects of conversations is to actually stop doing anything and just listen. But as I said, and as you've confirmed, people want to have this, I call it McDonald's. They want to, like, make the conversation so simple when it really
Yeah.
isn't. And then when you're not really agreeing with that, they'll say, well, you're not listening, or you're not being nuanced. It's like, well, you're just trying to simplify it. So anyway, we could
Yeah.
go on. We could go on.
No, I love what you said about the importance of listening. I think, like we talked before about being vocal, but I think being able to listen is just as important, if not more important.
Yeah.
And you know, I like to do my reading and my listening before an opinion forms, and
Always good.
I
Always good.
can still be very well wrong after doing my reading and my listening in expressing my opinion, but I think a lot of people nowadays tend to react a bit with their gut, instead of with their brain.
Yeah, and
Which,
it's kind of
yeah,
understandable to an extent, because I mean we're constantly being swamped by algorithms that are ready to, as I said before, radicalize our particular ideas and intentions. And this is left and right, you know.
yeah,
We're constantly being asked to join a team and see no benefit in an actual conversation. And then again, that rhetoric and idea can sometimes be co-opted by those who don't necessarily see the need for progression. You know, they kind of want to say, no, everything's fine. You know, if you stop complaining, maybe you'll be happier. It's like, I don't know if that's going to work for me.
easy for you to say. That's what I say.
Exactly. Exactly.
This book, oh gosh, I don't remember the name of the author, but it's a very famous book, like something like actually everything is kind of alright. That's kind of
Okay.
that's not the title, but it's sort of the idea of the book.
Right.
It's very famous. Maybe we can Google it and put it
I'm using the
there
future,
on
River.
the
I'm using the
screen.
future. It's on the screen. It's on the screen right now. I'm using my future psychic talents. Don't worry. It's
Yeah,
there.
and well, who wrote it? I think a
That's
Scandinavian
also on the screen. It's all on the
a
screen. Don't worry.
Scandinavian man who's, I think, is cisgender and white, and I don't know if he's straight, probably. So okay, easy for you to say. You live in a wealthy country with very good employment rates and beautiful nature, and you don't have to go through what disadvantaged, oppressed groups have to go through, and it's easy to be optimistic.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that is whenever you do point out the aspects of demographic that can lend itself to a frustrating point in progression, the people who hear that see that as an insult, or in some way you disregarding any of the troubles that they've had. And that's not what you're intending to do. But I
Yeah,
think some of the issue can also be because we're aware of that from both our marginalized groups. Sometimes when we say that in a nonchalant way, they see that as being almost self-righteous, and not that people haven't done that, but that isn't the problem. You know, you're citing a reaction to the main problem as being like, the real reason why we should actually be having a conversation. And that, takes us away from the actual right or particular, say, lack of agency that's actually initially on the table,
yeah,
so there was that.
yeah. I guess though, when people try to kind of push that view that actually things are not that bad, it's like it can be a little patronizing. So
Mm.
yeah, try and walk in my shoes, like Dave Gunn was singing. Try walking
Indeed,
in my shoes. Then maybe
indeed.
we can talk about it.
Yeah. I have a proposal for you. I have maybe, in fact, definitely two more questions. But what I'm going to do is, using my psychic future powers, I'm basically going to put this into a written interview, because as people are aware of it, we've been doing video interviews and written interviews. And
Yes.
I really want to make sure that the time on these things is short. I mean, we knew this video was going to be long, but
Yeah.
my proposal is,
We're keeping this short.
yes, relatively. So my
We're
proposal is that
keeping this short.
in the future,
We haven't even mentioned the Matrix.
we will talk about the Matrix in the written interview for sure, if we haven't already. So for
Yeah.
now, what needs to be done is the rite of passage with this whole thing is people need to know that you've got a song out, there's a video. Tell us a little bit about it and where people can find it.
Yes. So, well, there's a video coming out.
It's out. It's out.
It's out.
It's out.
It's already out. And it's called, the song is called Starve to Strength. And it was directed by yours truly, John Villas, and with...
Oh, John Clay. John Villas is my
John
civilian
Clay.
name.
Both are valid names to call you, I hope.
Well, I should think so.
I guess we have a thing with having different names, don't we, John? And starring me and as the boys singing, and starring proper actresses Ruth Mestel and Brian Miller. And yeah, it's I'm biased, but I think it's a great video, and it expresses some of the feelings that are in the song in a way that is, I guess, quite mysterious and intriguing. And I hope you all like them,
Yeah, I think,
both the song and the video.
yeah, I hope they like both. They can't come away not liking one or the other, because that's just not part of the deal. Where can they get the
Yeah.
music? I'd suggest Bandcamp. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's all on all major streaming services like Spotify, iTunes, Tidal, etc. And it's also available to buy both digitally and physically on Bandcamp, which is idlefire.bandcamp.com. And there's also our social media. I mean, I say our, it's really my project, but yeah, it's on Facebook and Instagram mainly. So it's Idlefire official on there, so you can catch up with what's new.
Fantastic. I've had so much fun talking to you, particularly in this video. I really hope people get into the music in the video and that you sell a lot of copies of the song. Thank you so much for your time, River.
You made it an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Stay well. Bye-bye.
You too.